Continuing on in the Torah lesson on vows or promises, we have talked about the idea that the command is that you have to pay your vows. You can't delay it. And then we've talked about the idea that this falls under the precedence of taking Yahuwah's name in vain. We represent God, and God pays his vows. God fulfills his promises. And as a representative of God, we have to do exactly the same thing. And our faith depends upon that. Okay? If God didn't fulfill his promises, then we would have nothing to have faith in. It would just be collateral damage. All right. So the next item that we need to talk about is not doing what you promise wounds your reputation. Numbers 30, verse 2. We've already read this verse, but let's look at a different aspect of it. If a man vow a vow unto Yahuwah, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break it, or he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Now, the word break literally means to pierce or to wound. In other words, he is wounding his word. His word is a part of his reputation. So whatever you say, that has to be taken very, very strictly, very important that we keep track of what we say, and that we say nothing that is anything like a promise, that we're not going to be very, very concerned about fulfilling. Okay? So our reputation is based on our word, and this is where you get the phrase in our language, "Your word is your bond." Right? It comes from this verse right here. Okay, if we break our promise, then how can we have faith that God will keep his promises? If we represent God and we're breaking our promises, then how can we believe that God is any different? We can't believe it. We just destroyed our faith. It destroys our faith and the faith of those around us. We represent God to others, and when others see us break our vow, then it destroys their faith. This is the bad consequences of breaking our promises. In other words, every sin has bad consequences. You may not know what those consequences are, but we're understanding this one right now. When you break a promise, you are destroying your own faith, and you're destroying the faith of those who see you. This is why God instructs us to pay our vows quickly. If we do that command, then we're going to represent God correctly. We're going to build our own faith, and we're going to build the faith of those around us. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 17 through 22. Therefore, when I was planning this, did I do it lightly? This is talking about Paul planning to come to Corinth. Or the things I plan, do I plan according to the flesh, that with me there should be yes, yes, and no, no? In other words, if I make a promise based on my own thoughts, then how how do I know that I'm going to be able to fulfill it? I don't have the power to fulfill my own promises. Things happen. Things are out of our control. There's no way that you can make a promise and have any assurance that you're going to be able to fulfill that promise, right? Based on your own abilities. But as God is faithful, okay? In other words, if fulfilling that promise is dependent upon God for our help, now it's a different story, because things aren't out of his control. Things don't just come up and that he can't deal with, okay? He has everything in mind. When he makes a promise, he is perfectly in control and he can fulfill it. We cannot. Our word to you was not yes and no. In other words, we didn't say, we're going to try to do this and we might not be able to do it because things are out of our control. That's not what we said. For the Son of God, Yeshua Messiah, who was preached among you by us, by me, Silvanus and Timothy, that's the apostle team of 3, was not yes and no, but in him was yes. In other words, when they hear from the Spirit and speak from the Spirit, then everything that they say is accurate. It is a promise, and it's based on what God is saying, not what a human is saying. For all the promises of God in him are yes, and in him, amen. I believe it. To the glory of God through us. In other words, God gets glorified when he makes a promise through us, because he's going to fulfill it. Now he who establishes us with you in Messiah and has anointed us in God, who also has seated us and given us the Spirit in our hearts as a guarantee. So here's pointing out that it's the Spirit talking through us that is able to give these promises accurately. And he is able to fulfill those promises because that is the character of God. And this is what we're after. We're after talking in the Spirit all the time, consistently walking in the Spirit. That's what we're after. That's what we want to do. And it's in the Galatians level is where we work on verbal sins. Okay, Psalm 39, which is a psalm that is in the Galatians level, says, I said, I will take heed to my paths, that I sin not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle, while the wicked is before me. I was dumb with silence. I held my peace, even from good, and my sorrow was stirred. In other words, I'm not going to say anything unless the Spirit is telling me to say it. I'm going to commit myself to not making promises, okay, as much as I possibly can. There are certain promises that I have to make, but when I do, I want to go to God about those things and make sure that that He is involved, because He's the one that has the power to fulfill those promises. James 3, verses 5 through 9. So also the tongue is a small member, and it elevates itself. Also a small fire causes large forests to burn, and the tongue is a fire, and the world of sin is like a forest. And the tongue, although it is one among the members, marks our whole body and sets on fire the successions of our generations that roll on as wheels, and it also burns with fire. In other words, if you make a vow from the flesh, then you have the possibility of not fulfilling that vow. Now you're representing God incorrectly. You're destroying your own faith. You're destroying other people's faith. You're burning down the whole forest. For all the natures of animals and of birds and of reptiles and of the sea and of the dry land are subject to the nature of mankind, but the tongue no one is able to subdue. This evil, when it is not restrained, is full of the poison of death. With it we bless Yahweh and Father, with it we curse men who are made in the likeness of God. Now we should not be doing that, obviously. We should not be saying one thing and then out of one side of the mouth and then saying another thing out of the other side of the mouth, right? So what do? Well, just shut up. That's the first step in this process of getting right. You just don't say anything. Talk to God. Get some feedback from God and then speak. Galatians 3:16 through 17. Now the promise was promised to Abraham and to his seed, and he did not say to him, to your seeds as to many, but to your seed as to one, who is the Messiah. And that's referring back to the promise to Adam and Eve. And we just read that in Romans 4. And this I say, that the covenant which was previously established by God in Messiah, the law, the Torah, which was 430 years later, is not able to set it aside and make the promise void. So, in other words, he's saying that the Torah can't make the promise void, and nothing else since that time can make the promise void. And why? Because God is, he is immutable. You know, he can't break his promise. Okay, so we're told to keep our promises, and the reason for that is because we represent God. And as representatives of God, if we break our promise, we destroy our faith, we destroy the faith of others. And so this is a terrible thing to do, and we need to really get a handle on the things that we say, and by not saying anything to start with. The less you say, the less trouble you can get yourself into. And so we need to instead listen to God and wait for him to tell us something and then share it. And as we do that in the congregation, we're going to get feedback. Yes, this was the Spirit. No, this wasn't from the Spirit. And that feedback is going to protect us from making statements that are believed by other people. In other words, if you say, I think God is telling us to do something, right? And then you get the feedback, no, this isn't from God. Well, nobody's faith is going to be destroyed by that. So it's a safe situation to experiment in. And we need to experiment. We can't get to 100% octane on the accuracy of the Spirit overnight. We have to do that through practice and experimentation. And so we're going to make mistakes, and it's okay to do that within the congregation. And that's why meeting together as a congregation and sharing what we think we're getting from the Spirit is so important for us. As we do that, we're going to see, yes, this is from the Spirit, no, this isn't, and start developing that accuracy so that when we get to the apostle level, we will be walking consistently in the Spirit. We will be saying yes, yes, not yes and no. Our promises will be a correct representation of God, because God will help us to fulfill each one of those promises, because he is the one who made that promise through us. Okay, so vows. It's an important part of the Torah, an important thing that we need to be concerned with, and it is an issue that we can start having victory over here at the Galatians level, where we're at, simply by trying to be quiet and listen to the Spirit and speak what we think the Spirit is sharing through us, and developing our accuracy in that area. Okay, so vows.